Morning, everybody. Glad you're here. Got a subject this morning that everybody is an expert on. You can give me stories that probably curl my toes. Subject happens to be temptation. We humans, we are masters of temptation. We are either very, very good at giving and doing temptation, or we are really suckers and we get suckered in to temptation. Either way, we live in temptation, basically. Well, what is temptation? We kind of know it. We recognize it when we see it. We're in the middle of it. But it's simply the allurement or the seduction to do evil. There's always a connotation with the word temptation. It's never really in a good way. You're never tempted to do good. You're never tempted to do right. The word temptation always has a negative connotation to it. That is, that you are tempted to do evil. You're never tempted to do right. There is one overriding verse that starts this whole thing off. And if you'll turn in your Bibles to 1 John chapter 2, we'll get started with this thing. So temptation can be basically anything that, causes you or makes you do something that is basically bad or evil. 1 John chapter 2, verse 16. This verse says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world." So these three negative things, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life, these do not come from God. So if you're going through temptation, and your temptation happens to be, of the flesh or of the eyes or pride and so forth, don't confuse that with God. That is not God pushing that train down the track. So all that is in the world, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Where have we heard this triune thing before? A couple of times, really. Genesis chapter 3, for instance. We looked at this verse last week, but in relation to something else. But turn back. Genesis chapter 3. First encounter. Adam and Eve with Satan. You remember the story, the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God made, and he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said. Well, we get down a couple of verses after that, and we hit verse 6. And it says, "And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food," number one, "and that it was pleasant to the eyes," number two, "and that it was a tree to be desired to make one wise." There's the pride of life. So John tells us all that is in the world, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. Here we are. Lust of the flesh, personified in food. Lust of the eyes. Now the tree looked really good. And then, of course, the pride of life. Certain things do not change. Satan found a winning combination when he came up with these three little things. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. It worked like a charm with Adam and Eve. Fast forward several thousand years. You're out there in the Judean desert. And you're in Matthew chapter 4. It says, and the Spirit led Jesus out into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. God's not tempting him. The Spirit led him out there. But the temptation is not going to come from God. The temptation is going to come from the devil. One of the problems that we have is this, and I'm just going to throw a stupid number out here, but let's say there's 12 areas of temptation. Could be food, could be the dessert tray, it could be pride of appearance or pride of how much money you make. It could be power, whether it be political power, whether it be the guard in a prison type power, whatever. Let's say there's 12 different things that people are really, really tempted with. Could be alcohol, could be drugs, it could be sex, it could be just fill in the blank. But let's say there's 12 out there. Everybody is going to have several of those temptations or weak points in their lives. And of the 12, let's say, you might be really, really, really susceptible to 4 of them and somewhat susceptible to, 4 others. Iffy. And maybe 4, they don't bother you at all. But the next person, take those 12, he is going to be susceptible to, let's say, 3 of them are really, really bad, but it might not necessarily be the same 3 or 4 that you're susceptible to, and there's your big weakness. And so we have this big disconnect between people. So let's say money, I just threw it out there. Let's say that money is not my big deal. I'm happy, I'm content. I don't have to really worry or second guess if an emergency comes up. Can I get this? Do I have to cheap out and get the cheap one because I can't afford this or that? God has allowed me to be in a state of life, and it wasn't always like that in my life, but right now it is, that money is not a big deal to me. But I know that there's other people that money is everything to them. They either don't have enough, or if they do have enough, it's not emotionally enough for them because they're worried about losing it. They're worried about the stock market crashing, or they're worried about being laid off, or they're worried about somebody robbing the bank or some stupid thing. In other words, all I'm trying to say in this facet is that everybody is susceptible to different things at different levels. And so it's hard for us to really empathize with the other person, because I look at that person that is consumed with money and I don't really get it. There was a time I got it, but I don't get it now. And so it's hard for me to empathize with them or sympathize with them because it's just not my biggie. And they look at me and they'll pick one of my real weak points on temptation and they'll say, well, good grief, man up. Get your act together. And they can't understand why certain things for me are so troublesome, whereas it's not a bother for them at all. And so this is one of the problems that we have as Christians in being able to comfort each other, strengthen each other, have each other's back, empathize with each other, intercede for each other, pray for each other, because we're on such a disconnect half the time on this stuff. And we're so consumed about our little problem that we can't really get into anybody else's problem. So this little triune formula that Satan came up with, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. He used it with God in heaven. He used it with Adam and Eve in the garden. He used it with Jesus in the wilderness. And I'll guarantee he'll use it on you, and has used it on you, and will continue to use it on you. Why? Because it never fails him. Well, it did with Jesus. But other than that, he's got a perfect record. So temptation is a really, really big thing in our Christian lives. It just is. When Jesus was in the wilderness being tempted of the devil, but let's just go through the three things and see if they match up with 1 John. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, pride of life. Does it match up with Genesis chapter 3? Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride of life. All right, first thing, what did Jesus get exposed to there by Satan? Oh, he had fasted 40 days. He hadn't eaten. And it says he was hungry. So the first thing Satan does when he comes to him, he says, hey, command a stone that it be made bread. Lust of the flesh. And it says he taketh them up to a high mountain. And it says he showed him all the kingdoms of the world and the power thereof. And he says, all these things will I give you if you fall down and worship me. So he takes him up to that mountain. He shows him lust of the eyes. Jesus sees all the kingdoms of the world. He sees the power. He sees the majesty. He sees all this stuff. And Satan says, hey, I'll give it all to you. Just fall down and worship me. So we've got the lust of the flesh. We've got the lust of the eyes. And what was the last one? Oh, yeah, pride of life. Satan takes him up to the pinnacle of the temple. And this verse says that nothing's going to happen to Jesus on this earth. God's going to look after him like it was his only son. He's going to watch over him as a little baby, through adolescence, through young adulthood, through manhood, and so forth, until it comes time to lower the boom. And so he takes him up to the pinnacle of the temple. He says, hey, just jump off. God won't even let you hit the ground. He's got so many angels sitting around here now, just waiting to intercede on your behalf. Show everybody. Blow a big trumpet. Throw yourself off the pinnacle of the temple. Let them watch you start to fall to the ground, to fall to your doom, and then watch the angels come and lift you up before your foot hits that ground. And everybody will be so impressed. Everybody will be so enthralled with your greatness and your uniqueness and so forth. Don't you want that? The pride of life. So how's he going to come to you? Sex, money, power, influence, things, the dessert table, the buffet, drugs, alcohol, who knows? But he's got something for you. One of the big problems that we have in this whole thing of temptation is that it's hard for us to distinguish between temptation and testing. God does test. God tests all the time. He does not tempt, because that is incompatible with his nature. He is not evil. He is not sinful. And so it is against his nature to try to trick us into being or doing evil. It's just counterintuitive and counterproductive to who and what he is. So he will, anytime you're ever tempted, you can mark it down. It is not God that is tempting you. Period. But he will test you and he will test you all the time. So between the devil's temptation and God's tempting, you're put through the ringer all the time. We all are. We're all subject to this. So let's get a couple of things straight in this, the difference on this testing and temptation type thing. Is it God? Is it Satan? Number one, look over in James chapter 1. James chapter 1, verse 13. Let's get this one right off the table right now. James 1:13. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, neither tempteth he any man. So when the temptation comes, whether it be drugs, whether it be alcohol, whether it be the dessert tray, whether it be the buffet, whether it be power, whether it be who, fill in the blank, when that comes upon you, that is not God doing that. And we'll solidify this verse a little bit later here. So number one, God doesn't tempt anybody. You say, well, yeah, it says that the Spirit led Jesus out into the wilderness to be tempted. Yeah, the Spirit led him out, but the tempting was done by Satan. Number two, difference between testing and temptation. We already briefly touched on this. Temptation always has an element of evil to it, of sin to it. You are tempted to have illicit sex. You are tempted to drink more than you should. You are tempted to take drugs when you shouldn't. You are tempted to exert power over somebody when you shouldn't be doing it. You are tempted, and there's always that connotation of bad or evil or sin involved with it. Testing. God tests us to measure, for our sake, to measure character and commitment to God. He doesn't tempt us to do bad things. When he tests us is to see what our character is. So he comes to Abraham. Now, he had already promised Abraham that through this boy, this particular boy, this specific boy, that there were going to be certain promises unfolded in his life. And so now God comes along and boom, he breaks that whole string, as it were, and he says, oh, by the way, I want you to kill him. Well, he hasn't had any kids yet. That was the thing. Had Isaac been, 45 years old or so and had 5 kids or whatnot, then theoretically, with the death of Isaac, the promise could have still gone on. But God slips this little testing in with Abraham, and he says, oh, kill him. And Abraham sits there and thinks, wait a second. God just promised me that through this boy, X, Y, and Z was going to happen. If I kill him, A, B, C kicks in, and it can't happen. What's going on here? Oh, I get it. God's testing me. And if I follow through with this thing and actually kill him like God said to do, there's only one alternative. God's going to raise him from the dead. Because he specifically said, this boy, not your son or a son, this boy. So Abraham's sitting there thinking this stuff through. And he says, yeah, that's the only logical conclusion. If I go ahead and kill him right now, God's going to have to raise him from the dead. Gee whiz, what other father had that same dilemma? On the same mountain. under the same circumstances some 2,000 years later. So Abraham says, okay, I'll kill him. And then I'll just watch God raise him from the dead. And at that moment, God knew his character. Well, God knew it all along, but now Abraham knew what the pecking order was here. Same thing with Job. God was testing Job. There wasn't anything in Job's experience that was going to lead him to do evil as such. Satan was orchestrating this stuff behind the scenes, but God still had control over the whole episode. So the purpose of the testing, it wasn't a temptation as such with Job that Satan wanted him to do something bad. No, that was a testing from God. And God just allowed Satan to be the instrument of this testing. Nobody was trying to get Job to, drink more and get drunk more often. Nobody was trying to get Job to steal and rob and coerce people to give more money or something. Wasn't any of that involved. This was just a simple testing. And I don't mean simple in that sense, but just a testing. And he passed the test. Adam and Eve. Was that a testing or was that a temptation? The connotation in that thing was all evil. God doesn't know that in the day you eat thereof, you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Oh, you won't surely die. She looks at the tree. Hey, good for food, good, pleasant to the eyes, tree to be desired to make one wise. She was going after things that God hadn't intended for her. She's going after evil. That was a temptation. That's the difference of what Adam and Eve went through and what Job and what Abraham went through. One, they're being tempted to do something bad. The other, they're being tested to reveal their character and their commitment to God. So when you're going through temptation, when you're going through testing, you've got to figure this out. Number one, if it's the testing or the temptation involves doing something bad, it is not God. So right then, you've won half the battle. If you can make that distinction. And if it's God testing me, then basically all I have to do is hang on and endure. If it's the devil tempting me, I better get my act together and I better dig my heels in. And I better do everything I can not to succumb to this form of temptation. Well, another thing about testing and temptation, so forth. Look in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. First Corinthians chapter 10. In 1 Corinthians 10, look at verse 13. Find it here. And let this one encourage you. This is a biggie. 1 Corinthians 10:13. There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. Everybody goes through it. But like I said at the beginning, you might have ones that you're more susceptible to or more liable to do, but everybody is subject to this kind of stuff. You're not unique. Nobody's really picking on you as such. Your wife, your husband, your kids, they're all going through the same thing. There have no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful. Now, there's a couple of things here you've got to get in your head. Number one, God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able. So whatever your temptation is, whatever level you are in this temptation thing, how susceptible you are to it, how easily you succumb to it, whatever it is, God has promised that whatever temptation comes, he will not allow it to be so bad that you can't get out of it. Now, you may succumb to it, you may give into it, but it's not that God let it be so bad that you couldn't. There is a way out. So it goes on. He will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. So you've got Satan on one hand tempting you. You've got God on the other hand holding you up, strengthening you. But at the end of the day, you have to take advantage of that. You have to grow a pair, as it were. You have to do something on this thing. God's not going to just sit back and say, well, you're on your own. He says, I'll give you the escape hatch, but you've got to press that red button. I'll give you the way out, but you've got to ask for the way out. So it's not the end of the world that temptation in and of itself comes to you. There's a way out. And God won't let it be so bad that it's going to just automatically overcome you. There is a way. And there is a verse for that that will end up with this thing at the end. James chapter 1. This is where we get into trouble. Because face it, a lot of the temptations that we succumb to, we love. I mean, we love them. I mean, I don't care if it's the buffet, the dessert tray. I don't care if it's sex, if it's alcohol, if it's drugs, if it's power, if it's influence, if it's whatever it is. Some of these things, we going out the gate, we love them. Let's face it. James chapter 1, verse 14. This is the problem. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. But I'll guarantee that in that temptation, the last verse we read, God's going to make a way of escape. He won't give you more than you can bear. And I'll guarantee that the first natural reaction, or at least maybe not the first, but during that process, when you're trying to process this thing out, oh, is this a testing? Is it a temptation? Well, if there's a connotation of evil with it, now you know it's a temptation. Okay, well, I got my ducks in a row here. This is not God doing it to me. It's Satan doing it to me. And gee whiz, well, God has promised that he won't make it so bad that I just automatically have to give into this thing. He will make a way to escape. Now, where's my escape hatch? I'll guarantee that there's going to be some point in that process that's going to be the last thing on your mind. You're not going to be looking for that escape hatch. You're not going to be looking for that way out. You're going to be looking for the excuse that is more than I can bear, is more than I can handle, is more than I can take. So I'm going to give into it because I can't fight it anymore. And James is here to tell you, hey, that's all on you now. You're tempted because you got enticed and you gave in. You're not going to be running back to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, generally. But God has made that provision for you. The most encouraging thing that I can give you this morning is this, and that is Jesus gets it. He gets you. When you're suffering temptation, regardless of the mode that it comes in, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life, he knows exactly what you're going through. As a man, not just in some, ethereal, God-like thing that he just kind of knows everything. No, no, no. He knows the experience. He knows physically, as a man, what you're going through. Hebrews chapter 4. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15. Hebrews 4:15 says, "For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feeling of our infirmities." We're infirm, we're weak. He knows that. He gets that. Why? But was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Every single temptation that you've had to endure, every single temptation that you gave into, Jesus knows exactly what you're going through. Look at Hebrews chapter 2. Hebrews 2, verse 18 says, For in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is able to succor them that are tempted. It just simply means that the word succor in Old English, it means encourage, lift up, help. Since he's gone through the temptation, he knows what it feels like, and he's able to help you. That's why in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, he says he won't allow an insurmountable amount of temptation hit you. He will keep it bearable. He will provide a way of escape for you. But he's not going to do it all for you. You have got to take that way of escape and go for it. It's when you fall into the James thing, when we're enticed and we give in. When we're lured into this thing, that's on us then. Look at the life of Jesus. I mean, good grief. Imagine, somebody today, look how we venerate singers, pop stars, movie stars, whatever it happens to be. I mean, we give them a life that they can live in, 5 homes, $20 million each or so. They get $25-30 million for making a movie. It might take them, a few weeks or a couple of months here or there. We shower them with more money than they know what to do with. We shower them with adoration. We shower them with everything that they want and could possibly need. We venerate them to the position of gods and stuff. We have magazines on them. We have movies on them. We have TV things on them. They have awards where they're giving each other stuff. I mean, they live a life the likes of which you and I can't even begin to imagine. Look at political power. Can you imagine having the power to enact a law that 350 million people in America might not want to do, but are forced to do it because you came up with a law? I keep thinking of like the stupid seatbelt law. How many people, how many years did it go where people resisted? They still do, and there are a lot of them still don't like it. This generation now, after 3 or 4 generations, we kind of got into it. But there was a time that one person who initiated that thing, and then maybe it went to a committee, and then it goes to a board and stuff, and then finally it gets enacted through Congress and what. But there was a point that there was one person said, oh, I know of another good law. Let's make it a law that everybody in America, every time they get into a car, always has to put a seatbelt on. Can you imagine the level of power that guy must have had surging through his veins when that thing was finally enacted? Now you take Jesus. He's 30, 31, 32 years old. He's the most famous guy on the planet at the time. He can walk around. He can multiply loaves and fishes, food. Just stand there and just, boom, loaf of bread, boom, loaf of bread, loaf of bread. I mean, it's just pouring at him. He can walk down a road and people can look on him and be healed, or he can touch them and they can be healed. He can restore eyes, he can restore limbs, he can restore sanity, he can cast out devils. Can you imagine the level of rock star, absolute maniacal pressure that he must have been under from people? If I can but touch the hem of his garment, if I can just touch the little seam on his robe, I can be healed. If he looks on me, if his shadow walks by me, I can be healed. This same guy, he's in a boat having a nap. The boat's in the process of being swamped with water and wind and storms and so forth. The disciples panic, they freak out, they get him up, say, Lord, carest thou not that we perish? He wakes up, looks around, says, oh, okay. And he calms the wind and the seas. Can you imagine him standing out there on the Mississippi Delta, 15, 20 years ago, when Katrina walked in off the Caribbean? And he has the power to stand there and say, wind, be still. And Katrina stopped. And all those thousands of lives, billions of dollars of property ruined and so forth, he could have stopped it in a nanosecond. And people knew that. Can you imagine the level of rock star status that he had? Can you think of an instance where any of this ever went to his head? I mean, you let me control the weather for 5 minutes and you're not going to recognize me. You let me do loaves and fishes. You let me heal my body as such, or my wife's body. Good grief. You're looking at a character now that you won't recognize in a million years. I will have changed so much, and probably for the bad. Jesus lived a life of such low key from his standpoint that the deal was, when they came into the garden, the 400 or 500 soldiers, along with Judas Iscariot, when they came into the garden, Judas had to give them the soldiers a heads up. He says, the guy that I walk up to and give a kiss on the cheek, that's Jesus. Well, they didn't know that until Judas walked up and gave him a kiss on the cheek. It's not that Jesus just stood there and glowed or was levitating 6 inches off the ground and was pulsating with energy and stuff that they could see, oh yeah, this is him, let's get him. No, he had to be pointed out. If there was anybody on this planet that had an excuse to have a big head, as it were, it was him. So when he says, hey, I know what you're going through. The scribes, the Pharisees, the elders, the Sadducees, all the lawyers and stuff, all these guys, they made a career out of doing nothing but trying to trip him up, to tempt him into saying something that was wrong, saying something that was contradictory, saying something that was going to contradict an Old Testament passage or so. They made a career out of this thing, trying to trap him, tempt him. When you go through temptation, Jesus gets it. There was never a human being on the face of this earth, from Adam to now, that was tempted the likes of Jesus Christ. And I don't mean just by the devil out there in the wilderness in that 40-day period. His whole entire life was nothing but one big giant temptation from somebody. What about us? Go back to James again. How do we realistically just tie this all together now? James chapter 1. James chapter 1, beginning in verse 2. My brethren, count it all joy when ye fall into diverse temptations. Boy, that's counterintuitive. I mean, we just spent the whole 40 minutes or so here saying, I could do without the temptation. I don't have to go through that. I don't want to go through that rigmarole of trying to figure, is it a testing? Is it a temptation? Should I hold on? Should I endure? What do I do? And all this stuff. Now, James says, hey, count it all joy when you fall into different temptations. Verse 3, knowing this, that the trying of your faith, and that's what the temptation is the trying of your faith. Knowing that the trying of your faith worketh patience. So the devil comes, or that hot chick down the road comes, or the boss comes, or whoever comes and tries to tempt you into something, and you, by the grace of God, are able to resist it and have it pass over you. That exercise of going through that gobbledygook motion thing, that has increased, maybe imperceptibly, but it has in a definite way increased your patience. So that hopefully the next time another, maybe from a different direction, a different source, temptation comes to you, that you can rely on that process that you did before, and you can do it again, and then you can do it again, and you can do it again. And hopefully you can minimize the times that you blow it. You're not always going to be successful. That's why we have a 1 John 1:9 in there. It says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. So you've got outs all the way around this thing. Matthew chapter 26. Matthew 26. Verse 41. This is one of the biggies that you do to get out of this thing. Matthew 26:41. Watch and pray. Why? That ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. God knows that. We all have good intentions. We all hope for the best. We all think, oh yeah, when temptation comes, I'm going to grip my teeth really hard and I'm going to resist and so forth. Spirit is willing. But the flesh, sometimes we just give up. We just can't take it. It's too overwhelming to us. So what's he say? 2 little words. Watch and pray. You say, well, that's too simple. That's the whole essence of Christianity half the time. It's so simple that we want to do all the big convoluted stuff first. We want to try all the biggie stuff first. And then when they don't work, finally we come to God and say, I give up. What do I do? Hey, watch and pray. Watch. Be alert. Be aware what's going on. Know that when you're going to go to a certain place and certain people are going to be there and certain things are going to take place when you get there, be aware of that up front. Ask God for support. Ask God for help. Ask God for strength and so forth. Sometimes temptation comes out of the blue. Boom. You're walking down the road and there's some girl in front of you and she's wearing a thong bikini. Well, you didn't plan for it. You didn't think it was going to happen. But boy, there it is in front of you. Now what do? Your brain is racing. Your mind is going every which way but loose and so forth. You've got a problem right now. But we do what we can for our part. God's doing his part. We do what we can. Our part, one of them, is to watch and pray. And the other verse told us, resist. God won't pack more on or let more get packed on than you can take. He will make a way of escape. But there's where the watch and the pray comes in. So when it's all over and done, you're going to have temptations for the rest of your life. Every day of your life. Some stronger than others. Some you can handle. Some you're going to have real trouble with. Got to remember these little steps and these little things that distinguish between the testing, the temptation, knowing that God won't let more get packed on you than you can take. That Jesus himself understands everything you're going through. He was tempted in all points. Do you think he didn't have sex thrown at him? Do you think he didn't have money thrown at him? Do you think he didn't have power thrown at him? Do you think that he didn't have everything in the world thrown at him? And he could have availed himself of it. He could have indulged himself with it. He was tempted at all points, such as us, and yet without sin. He knows exactly what you're going through. He says, watch and pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this book because there's so much of life that we are subjected to, that we are forced to endure, that this book, it covers like a page. I wouldn't know how to resist. I wouldn't know how to recognize. I wouldn't know how to cope with. I wouldn't know what to do with something like temptation if I didn't have this book in front of me. And that's not to say that I'm good enough that I always, in all points, adhere to it. No, I'm just as bad as everybody else on that one. I blow it all the time. And if one temptation doesn't get me, Satan has another one right up his sleeve. He's going to slip right in, right behind it, and that one will probably get me. But I don't have to live in despair. I don't have to live in the fact that, if I blew it here, I'm done forever. You have made a way of escape. You've made a way to get back, to reinstate ourselves into fellowship with you. So, Father, the fact that you know what we're going through, the fact that you, through your Son, understands every facet of every single temptation that we could ever be exposed to. He's done it. He's been through it. He was successful in it, and he knows how to keep us out of it. God, just give us the strength to do the watch and the pray. Give us the strength to resist the devil, and he'll flee from us. Give us the strength to do what we should do, and then let the rest of it fall with you. We thank you in Jesus' name.